Hello and welcome once again to It's a Frankly Hairy podcast. Welcome back to the forest this week. I'm your host, Frank Weber. Always glad that you could join me here. Have a pretty substantial show for you here today with a unique inspiration. And it's going to take a little bit of time, so let me go ahead and get into that. But a few weeks ago, I believe it was on episode 64. Well, first, I need to tell you, I need to make a big correction from that show because I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast a few days ago, and he had on Lukas Nelson. And I apparently had gotten, well, what happened, of course, was my wife and I went to a casino resort. Have to backtrack here. You have to tell these stories in a certain order here, and sometimes I get kind of confused or tell things out of order, and then it doesn't make any sense. So anyway, what happened is a few weeks ago, my wife and I went to this casino resort. I'm not going to say which one, but we went to one of the pools there, and there was an unusual character who was placed next to us. I mean, we had been there a few hours and probably weren't going to stay too much longer, but we had an unusual character who claimed to be Willie Nelson's great-grandson, okay? And, he told us some stuff and did some odd things. Encourage you to check out that episode. It's number 64. But I later looked up Willie Nelson's great-grandson, and the internet gave me some bad information and directed me to a guy named Lukas Nelson, who, as I learned from Joe Rogan's podcast the other day, is actually Willie Nelson's son. He's a fairly young son. I think he's probably about 30, mid-30s or so. And so I wanted to make that correction that Lukas is not his great-grandson, but actually his son. And Willie, there's always, I don't know, for some reason, for me, I've always enjoyed his work, and Lukas sounds a lot like him both in regular speech as well as song. And I've always, Willie's been married 4 times, and it spanned a lot of years, and I have no idea what his family tree actually looks like, so that's why I'm, and so it's possible, I would say it's possible for his son to have it's possible to have like a grandchild that is older than a grandchild from a different parent to be older than one of his sons, if that makes sense, because there's so much branching and whatnot that exists. He's been around so long. Willie's 92 now, and I even get confused about his age, because a little over a year ago, they televised a birthday party concert thing where Willie sang with a lot of people like Keith Richards and George Strait and such. And then a few weeks ago, I get information that, well, he's actually 92 now. And I'm like, well, he must be, it sounds, if I just took that information point and blank, it sounds like he was aging a little bit faster than what I had previously experienced. He would have gone up 2 years in age in only like 1 year, for instance. So I don't know what the deal was with his 90th birthday in May of last year, because I thought that was a fairly recent event. So anyway, the point is I'm confused on Willie's family tree as well as his age. And so the point is I'm trying to make a correction, as all good artists and podcasters and all that sort of thing should, journalists in fact as well. I'm trying to make a correction and tell you that I'm sorry. Lukas is actually his son, and the internet gave me some bad information. Now, the guy that we saw, I don't know. Maybe that was actually a great-grandson, although he looked quite a bit older. And even though we already have surprises with Willie's age and family tree, he seems like the guy that we saw at the pool would probably be a little bit too old to be a great-grandchild. There was something definitely off about him. But anyway, the point of the matter is I heard Lukas on Joe Rogan's podcast this week, and there's a couple of, and I don't know, I really enjoyed the interview. I'm not trying to plug Joe's show. Lukas is very much like his father, Willie, who I've never met, but I wouldn't mind meeting him. Very genuine person, very relatable. It's possible, like, he's a lot like his dad in a sense of political and social issues, and I may disagree with him on some of those things, but they're very nice, very genuine people. They care about you and like you, and if they like you, then it's easy for me to like you back, and of course, I like their music anyway, so I like their music very much, in fact. So anyway, the point of the podcast here today, during the course of that conversation, and part of the reason why Joe Rogan has such a popular show, well, Joe's a real guy as well, and they have these real conversations, and in the course of the conversation, there were a couple of points that Lukas brought up that I totally 100% want to talk about here a little bit on this show and how it relates to this show in particular. Last week I did kind of a different show. I talked a little bit about the Kerrville floods, and then I made a pop culture reference to a couple of the original Superman films with Christopher Reeve, and I don't know, the show didn't get a lot of listening to. I don't know why. I don't get a lot of feedback on this show. I don't know if it had something to do with the titling, or people get very dismissive when you bring up certain art and certain pop culture, because I've always had that feeling. In fact, this goes back a lot of years, and that's the first point that I wanted to bring up here, because Lukas, when he was talking with Joe and they're talking about this myriad of subjects, Lukas actually brought up stuff like Star Wars and Star Trek and maybe a few other things that he was making references to, and the reason that I bring this up is because we have this weird double standard, I think, regarding what is good art and what is not necessarily bad art, but then what a lot of people would consider just totally dismissive. It's like a weird kind of art arrogance, if you will, in this society. And I had a great story that I would tell you, by the way, to illustrate this. But back in high school, I had this English teacher senior year. I think it was just the fall semester I had him. We had a guy, and this was in an era, by the way, living in Austin. There were a lot of people coming into Austin and other parts of Texas and for work, and maybe the work sent them there, or I don't know exactly what this, or I think we were a little bit more sane as far as people leaving for economic reasons back then, but I guess that could be part of it as well. But we had a guy who was from Wisconsin named Mr. Cohn, kind of like Mindy Cohn from Facts of Life. And he was an English teacher, and so I did a research paper on the oil industry. I interviewed a neighbor, and basically, he told me, like, well, the world is not running out of oil, but if you find an alternate fuel supply, something better than gasoline, you're still going to need to drill for oil. You're still going to need oil on this planet because there's so many uses for petroleum products. They're all over the place. We would have a much different life without them, was basically the gist of the research paper. And I decided to open the paper with references to the Beverly Hillbillies who, struck oil in Arkansas. I don't know if they have a lot of oil there. And as well as the show Dallas, because, JR and the Ewings and all those people were all about the oil industry. So I just made quick reference to them to open my paper, and Mr. Cohn did not like that because he basically said, if you make references to these, then it kind of diminishes the rest of your paper and your credibility. And I sort of agree with him on it, even to this day, but to this day I also sort of disagree. People want to laugh, and they want a little, or at least a little bit of a chuckle, and there's nothing wrong with disarming them ahead of time. And so that has always kind of stuck with me, and kind of bothered me. And then, and I make references to other pop culture things on this show. Let me give you another contrast real quick before I get back into the Lukas Nelson thing. But there are things in art and literature, maybe even in pop culture, that you can quote 6 ways from Sunday and everybody will, or at least the elites, if you will just totally love it. And I was thinking about epic poems or pieces of literature, whether it's someone recent like, let's say, Maya Angelou, who I think passed away a few years ago, or somebody a little older like Emerson or Frost, or even Homer, who was, literary from a couple thousand years ago. And actually Homer did some comedy, in fact, as well. The Iliad and the Odyssey, that's why I enjoyed reading it in high school. We actually read comedy once or twice from Homer. But you can quote those people all day long, and people will like you and respect you, assuming they're fairly educated and familiar with their works and everything. But if you quote stuff like even stuff that's fairly beloved, like Star Wars and Star Trek and Superman, and I don't even know, maybe even things that were popular but controversial, like Archie Bunker or something like that. I mean, people may get a little skeptical with you, and they might be like, "Oh, I don't really want to listen to this. That's either too old or not really interested in comedy or whatever." And so there is this double standard, essentially, that you can only talk about certain things in order to get your point across. And I just have always thought that was such bullshit, and that's why I don't do that on this show. And so I was really glad when, I heard Lukas talking to Joe. By the way, I think Lukas, and I don't know if Joe does any podcasts, but I mean, they would both be great guests on this podcast, perhaps someday. But I heard Lukas talking about Darth Vader and Empire Strikes Back and Star Trek The Next Generation, which Joe teased him about because he said, well, that's not the real Star Trek, and all that. And he's referencing them in order to bring about a certain value or life lesson. And, because you can find them anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a great work of literature or some, measly excuse. Well, not measly excuse. I mean, it could be I was thinking about, even in the worst of shows and the worst of art, occasionally you can find a nugget of wisdom and a nugget of living a better life or learning about life. And but he was quoting things that a lot of people have seen and a lot of people like, and yet a lot of people will just go ahead and just dismiss a lot of that stuff, and I never understood it. But I felt better because he was making these references. I'm talking about Lukas Nelson is making these pop culture references because I do the same thing here. And I'm trying to make a point through them. trying to educate people, trying to help them understand something that is maybe perhaps always been a part of human history, human nature, and trying to bring that to light, and hopefully we can take that and become better as a result. So anyway, I was glad to hear that. I thought it was terrific. I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one that has a certain nostalgia and a certain respect for really all works and anything, even if it's some small point, if we can learn from them. So thank you for that, Lukas Nelson. The other thing that I wanted to tell you from that conversation that I really enjoyed and it really struck me is that he and I guess Rogan does this too, but we all believe that humanity is sort of operating at sort of a less than prime level, and we have this potential, even in a time where this world may pass away and be consummated, as it were, to God's kingdom, as I believe as a Christian and everything, that even in the fallen world that we currently live in, that there's room for a lot of improvement amongst humanity. And they talked about this in the context of Elon. Elon has this thing about wanting to take humanity and colonize other places in the solar system, particularly on Mars. And I don't know if there's a true need for that or not. I'm skeptical of it because I don't really know what we would do on these other planets or in outer space, or if it would be necessarily healthy to our way of life and our mental state. Excuse me, I'm just talking here, getting a little thing in my throat. Like, for example, if you would have to have some kind of artificial environment to live on Mars, and probably most planets for that matter. And I don't know that we would necessarily be happier there or better there or have a better mental state toward a lot of things. And of course, their concern on the show was that humanity, it may not be ready for that. I mean, if we can't improve here first, we're just going to go and do the same things on other planets as well. And that's another big point of my show. That's what I'm trying to point out to you each and every week about how we really can be better if we just take a little bit of time, to talk things through, think about what changes we can make for ourselves to begin with, not necessarily looking at other people first, but ourselves, and how we can become better people, better humans, better stewards of the earth before we think about going elsewhere. Even if we could find a planet that was Earth-like, which I think that would be the most ideal situation for us. It's not. You're talking about experiments that I think, that your experiments like Elon has suggested, there have some merit to them, but they're not. They're not. I think they're kind of doomed to fail in our current state, is what I would tell you, and that's why you should listen to my show and Joe Rogan's podcast, lots of other podcasts, because you can hear these things, learn these things, and it's great to know that there are other people out there who are like-minded to me, like the Lukas Nelsons of the world. Like I said, we might not agree on everything. I mean, we probably don't. I don't think you're going to find anybody who 100% agrees with you up and down and sideways and 6 ways from Sunday. But it's nice to hear somebody who kind of comes from things at a similar ground floor perspective as I do, I think. And that's why I really enjoyed the Joe Rogan podcast with Lukas Nelson this week. So those 2 points being said, those are really important to my show here. You can learn things from all sorts of art, whether it's high art that everybody thinks is wonderful or art that is somehow considered to be a little bit lower. And through the learning and through the awareness, I guess first off, humanity can be a lot better. We're capable of a lot more good than we try to do on this planet, and that's a big part of why I try to do this show. Now, before I wrap things up here this week, I just need to tell you, like, I don't know if last week compared to the week before, like 2 weeks ago, I talked about how one of my articles was finally acknowledged. And I was thrilled about that. I don't get a lot of responses, even though I talk about controversial things sometimes, or maybe, I assume that I ruffle some feathers. I usually don't hear from anybody. If they don't like the show, I guess they just turn it off. I don't really know for sure. But I am trying to get reactions here, good and bad, and I'm going to employ certain techniques, and so that was the main point of hearing Lukas and being able to get some kind of affirmation that I'm not the only one who thinks along the same lines. That's what I'm trying to say. But as far as last week's show, I talked about the Kerrville flooding. I'm not going to go great deal into that again, although I can tell you I don't think it was preventable, and there have been a lot of politicians on both sides who have come out in the last week or 10 days trying to act like it was. It's sad. I mean, totally, don't get me wrong, it's tragic to lose all those lives, but I don't think it was preventable. And in fact, as an analogy, my wife works out of town and travels a fairly long distance to and from every week, and it's one of the things that I'm concerned about in my life these days. I'm not going to tell you a lot of personal stuff about me, or at least too in depth, but she was almost to her destination Sunday night and had a flat tire, and she almost never has any tire or car issues. And was like 2 miles of where she was going and got a tire really just gave out, or maybe she hit something. I don't really know. Wasn't with her, but sometimes those things happen no matter how much prevention and care you put into them. So the same thing with the Kerrville floods, and then of course I made the reference to Superman and why we edit movies the way we do now, and are there other issues behind it? I don't know. It's hard to tell, but I personally like to leave certain art intact, whether you think it's good art or not good art. And so, but anyway, I think that's about all that I have for you today. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. Hopefully it's coherent for you. I would absolutely love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your comments, and I apologize, by the way, to Lukas for mischaracterizing his relationship with Willie. Lukas is his son, his young son of 30 some odd years, rather than his great grandson. But anyway, but thank you, Lukas, for the wonderful interview with Joe Rogan. I would ask people, of course, you can always check out that interview. I don't normally send people over to another show like that. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up today. So love to hear from you. Sharing is caring. You have the option to share or subscribe, as well as send me a comment or a direct message. I haven't gotten a ton of those. I get them once or you can even like it as well, and likes are fine, but they're not particularly interactive. And I'd love for this to be an interactive show. So anyway, I'll go ahead and wrap it up and stop it here. Something to think about this week, and I look forward to giving you some more information again next week on whatever it may be. I do think it was unique that getting some new information and making a correction led to the inspiration for this week's show. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and sign it off now. Thank you for joining me here in the forest. I'll look forward to you again next week. This is Frank Weber from It's a Frankly Hairy Podcast. So long. I love you. See you then.